Welcome to All in Yellow,
the official Norwich City podcast.
We are delighted to welcome former club director and much celebrated actor, comedian and writer Stephen Fry to the show. Stephen, it is so good to see you today. Firstly, how good does it feel to be back here, back home at Carrow Road?
It feels wonderful. I mean, let's be honest, there isn't quite the atmosphere when I'm usually in this particular room, which is where, when I was a director in particular, one would have one's lunch.
You were?
Yeah, before every match. But it is good to be back, yeah.
And how much have you missed sport and football in particular? Obviously, it's been on the television, but not being able to come to the games, it's such a lifeline for a lot of people, isn't it?
It really is, and it's an extraordinary thing how important sport has been in as much as it's been able to resuscitate itself. And you know, I think at first, for pretty obvious reasons, golf and snooker were easy. Relatively easy to get in front of the public, and darts and so on, but football much harder because it just involves more people, so many more people, and all that travelling and you know, a whole part of football is the away game and against the home game, and you know, the sense of different fans being at your ground and your fans going off to another ground. You know, that's a big part of football, much more than it is a part of cricket or darts, obviously, or golf or anything like that. That the whole tribal nature of the game is so stitched into its very fabric that although you can have, you know, the playing of a game, it needs a lot more. And, you know, I think you get a sense that everyone's still feeling their way. It was quite noticeable with the internationals that they felt dead.
Yeah.
Do you remember that Iceland game? I mean, that was just like
Smith. I know.
Smith.
It's completely different, isn't it,
Yeah.
for everyone? But I just want to take you back to your first games, really, coming and visiting Norwich. You obviously grew up just down the road at Reetham. Tell us about how you came to be a Norwich City fan.
Well, it's a no-brainer if you grow up in Norfolk because there's only one club, really. I'm sure the fans of the King's Lynn Linnets will scream in disbelief that I could say such a treacherous thing. But to be honest, yes, I mean, it's a Norwich area. It's the huge catchment area, this big county. And so therefore you just got used to old boys in the street, in the countryside when I was a tiny boy. Just say, do you see the game last night or whatever? And that could only mean Norwich. Whereas if you heard...
It wasn't going to be Ipswich.
No, exactly. And if you're in London, it could mean anything.
Yes.
So it just became a part of the county, like the Broads and the coast. And, you know, it was just, you know, if you come from Norfolk, there's Norwich City.
Yeah.
And I went to the first one, a farmer friend. I'd done, as you do when you're a kid, you know, you in the countryside, you work on the harvest, or you used to when they actually were quite labour intensive things. You'd help with the baling or something. I know the picture of me doing that is kind of preposterous.
I like the picture.
Well, of course, being the kind of child I was sneezing all the time because I was always allergic to something in nature. But he said, "You'll come to the game," you know. So I came, and that was still in the days of terraces, and it was a remarkable feeling. It was. Well, you know, anybody who remembers their first game, their first match, knows that thing, that noise, the flow of people through the turnstile, the sudden feeling that you're a part of this rite of passage, that you're becoming, you know, you're becoming a fan now. You belong here, and you're scared at first even to open your mouth in case you say the wrong thing. Oh, well done. No, that was terrible.
We've all been there.
Yeah, you feel really, I've said the wrong thing. And of course, also, as I became a bit older, I got quite scared of going because it was at the height of the era of football, hooliganism and violence of the worst kind. Particularly, I remember Manchester United matches. When United came to Norwich, there was always violence in Prince Wales Road and places like that, and around the station, you know, the bits sort of leaking out from Carrow Road. And there was, you know, hear these stories about how, you know, they'd find especially a young fan and drag him round a corner and cut his ear off or something.
Wow.
You know, all these urban myths. I mean, yeah, of course, silly, really. And I never actually experienced anything like that, to be honest. But you always, you know, you always felt, especially and this is where we have to get into the very English thing. People will know from my voice, and I suppose there's no point hiding it, that I went to a private school, i.e. what we call a public school, and it didn't even play football. We played rugby in that period, and there's this class thing that. So I remember when I became, a director of Norwich City, I was on the board, and people said, "But you're not a football type of person." Just as
what is a football type of person?
I know, and I love darts as well. And people go, "You can't like darts. It's a working class game." I think, well, how is Britain ever going to sort itself out if you're kind of doing this ridiculous division amongst the circumstances of someone's birth determining what sports they're allowed to like? I mean, that's mad and sad, frankly. But I know that there is, especially in London, for example, there's a lot of tension about rich people being able to afford to go to Chelsea games. It's all, BBC executives and that kind of thing. Where do the real fans get a chance when the ticket prices are this high? And so, there is always underlying British life this slight embarrassment and unease about class and who you are. I mean, even, as a woman, the whole issue of being a woman and going to football matches was 20 years ago was jolly difficult. Yeah. It really was.
Do you think we're heading in the right direction,
Oh, goodness,
though?
yes. I mean, frankly, the best commentators and analysts of the game are women now at the moment, it seems, doesn't it? Yeah. And the women's game itself is improving and really coming on. And, it's always, at best, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back with progress in these areas. But I think we are in a much better place than we were. Yeah.
And you talked about being on the board back in 2010. You were on the board for just over 5 years. Yeah. How did that differ from being a fan?
Well, of course, it differed in ways that were part of the reason why we all agreed that it would probably be a good idea if I didn't bother to be on the board.
We didn't all agree that.
I couldn't turn up to the board meetings so often. I was spending a lot of time in America during that period, and so for most board meetings I couldn't be there. When I was there, if I saw a spreadsheet, I would go pale and gasp and clutch at my throat and faint, because Stevens were not put on this world to examine spreadsheets. I just don't. It's pathetic of me, and I'm sure if I concentrated and worked hard, I could understand profit and loss. And
you got so much other things on your mind all the time.
I mean, as Clint Eastwood says in Magnum Force, a man's got to know his limitations. and as far as my limitations are concerned, I'm not a business-oriented sort of person. So there was lots of talk, incredibly important talk for the future of the club about money, financing, investment, property, land, all those things. And football, quite rightly, I was not there to discuss whether or not, we should, where we should have a flat back 4 or whatever. That was not my job either. So I saw it as much more my job to try and be a public face of the club where possible, and use my Twitter followers and so on, and to be able to spread news of this new initiative or whatever it might be that Nick Ferrari, who was doing the press and publicity at the time, would ask me to do, and I'm very happy to do that. Frankly, I'm on a few boards of things, the Royal Academy in London and the Criterion Theatre in the West End, for example. And in recent times, we've had to do a lot of Zoom board meetings. And that I have this theory about British public life, that while the people on the top are very often absolute pranets, I mean, just awful, ridiculous, not anything to do with their politics particularly, but just the people in the public eye who are the top figures are very often extremely annoying, extremely lazy, extremely duplicitous. But there is a type of person at the second and third tier who get on with running things, who sacrifice enormous amounts of their time to make things right, who are masters of detail, who stay up reading documents to make sure they understand what's going on, who do the due diligence type things, who without whom this country would never exist. And you see that in football clubs. I'm certainly not saying that the public faces of Norwich City were like that, because Delia and Michael and Ed Balls and all the other figures we've had, and we've been incredibly lucky. But it's certainly true in politics, you know, and in the health service and so on. You know, you just see there are people who get on with it, and without being noticed, they do extraordinary work. And so I knew that when it came to Norwich City, because I just couldn't come to the board meetings, there was not much point me really staying on in that capacity, but that I'm always happy to do anything I'm asked to do in terms of publicity or help, or, you know, some video or something for some new charitable or other initiative that the club is undergoing. I'm, you know, very, very pleased to do that. And of course, it is very different in terms of the football, because naturally you become aware when the club isn't doing well of the pressures that start to build up on the chair and the board and on the directors of football and of course the manager when the club isn't doing well. And that's always been the case. I mean, ever since I can remember, that was true when Arthur South was the chairman, and, you know, all the way back to the Bond days and before, and Ron Saunders and others. You know, there would be demonstrations outside this ground and people saying it's got to go, and Keith Skipper would be writing articles about it. You know, that's always been the case. And it's one of the peculiar and fascinating things about football, that it's a business, not a democracy. Absolutely. And yet spiritually it is a democracy. Spiritually, the club does belong to the fans and the people of the area, 100%. Even though it doesn't technically or in fiduciary senses and all the financial stuff. And we know about the American model. We know how American franchise business models have begun to creep over here, and we know that you know, even the very nature of a club's roots are irrelevant to the business model in America. So the famous example was in 1957 when the Brooklyn Dodgers, the great Dodgers, one of the great baseball teams, you know, who were part of Brooklyn in the way that the Brooklyn Bridge is part of Brooklyn, they were just bought and taken. Not just taken out of Brooklyn, they were taken to Los Angeles, 3,000 miles from their home, and they're now the LA Dodgers. And can you imagine that happening? Well, it sort of happened with Wimbledon, you could argue, of course, going off to become MK Dons. And so, you know, it is always possible that, but generally speaking, almost all football lovers have a very strong sense of the roots of their club and the meaning of their club and how the fans are a part of it. So it's a very uneasy kind of thing. And when it works, it's the happiness when a club is successful. But the speed, that's the thing. The speed with which a club can go from the very heights to the very depths. I mean, look at Wigan. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Horrible to see.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Really. And Wimbledon, indeed, was a good example of that I mentioned. So you've always got to be aware that disaster is around the corner in sport.
Yeah, and the running of the club is everything, and you can't lose sight of what it means to the fans. But we can't help but notice that when you joined the board, we were in League One, and then by the time you left, we were in the Premier League. You've got to take some credit for that, haven't you?
Thank you for that very much. I'm glad somebody has finally come out and said it.
We all noted it. But what is your relationship like with Delia and Michael? Because obviously you touched on it there. They've done so much for the club. They've had a long relationship with the club and still do. What do you make of the work they've done?
Well, it's very warm. I mean, I should hope every Norwich fan knows this by now, if it isn't apparent, that their love for the club is absolutely unconditional and pure and intense and real, and as great as any love as any fan can have for a club. It is absolutely genuine. They're certainly not in it to make money. That much is clear. They're not in it for power or kudos. They go to every game, and yes, they're fortunate enough sometimes to be able to go by plane rather than by train or
it's
bus.
A little bit quicker.
But the fact is they are devoted, and they have warm relations with everyone through the club. Everyone who works at Carrow Road knows Delia and Michael and knows how much they put into it, and indeed the affection that is and respect that is felt from the managers. And I mean, I sat at this very table, literally, or if it's not the same, in this very place, with Delia and Michael and Arsene Wenger, just to name drop. For the Arsenal had the very last game of the season a couple of years ago, if you remember.
Yeah.
And Delia and Michael went off to take a phone call or something, and Arsene leant forward to me and said, "You know how lucky you are to have people like that to run your club."
Oh, wow.
Said, you know, everybody in football looks at Norwich and says, "Oh, that is what you need. You need people like that."
Wow, and that's coming from Arsene Wenger.
And he really meant it, and you could see it. It was so touching. And Bobby Robson was big friend and very tight with was, you know, he said the same, you know, you just remember how lucky you are to have, because they don't interfere. They know their place as far as football is concerned. I mean, if you compare it to Rupert Murdoch buying the Times and the Sun, he interfered straight away and told his editor what to write, which you never do any more than the owner of a club tells the manager how to pick the team.
And is that how you keep the family and the community feel? Because when you talk about Norwich City, a lot of fans, as you say, Arsene Wenger there, he was even quoting the job that they've done, but a lot of fans of other teams look at what Delia and Michael do and do comment on how you keep the family feel. Is it that important?
I think it is, because, you know, people don't often comment on this, but there's something deeply unpretentious about Delia and Michael. They don't pretend to be what they aren't. They present exactly what they are, which is just they love it. You know, they don't pretend to be experts. Delia will always say, "Oh, what's that player's name again?" You know, and you're going, "Delia, you come to every single match." but you know, she'll just get excited. "Who is that?" You know, and then she'll, "Oh, that's him. Oh, he's my favourite. Oh, I love him. Oh, what was wrong with that?" And Michael will whisper to her, "It was offside." "Oh, what's it?" You know,
she needs better glasses.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
She's just not in any way being pretentious or pretending to be anything that she isn't. And that communicates enormously, because her love of the football is all about the atmosphere and the feeling and the fun and the pleasure of getting behind the team. And of course, no one has ever got behind a team more famously than Delia.
Let's be having you.
Never forget. There's a lot, you know, that worries people in terms of the way the game is going financially and internationally, and the way, you know, elite clubs are moving away from the heartlands of the game, as it were. And we all have views about that, and we all worry about there being a special kind of Champions League type thing that will hive off the top teams from the Premiership, and it'll become even more exclusive and worrying, and all those things. And there's the financial pressure on the smaller clubs and some of the ancient clubs. We look at what happened to Bolton, and, you know, there's a lot, and Bury, and there's a lot of sad things going on in football. But at its heart, there is the game, and we're worried about VAR and new handball rules and all that, you know. So there's always something to worry about. But at its heart, there is this sense of how it binds a community together. And the community can be a literal community in the sense of Norwich and Norfolk, a very clear geographical catchment area, but it's also the community of fans, which is all over the world. You know, there's a pub on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is the Manhattan Canaries meet every to watch games, and so, you know, there's a group in LA that I've seen as well. So you know, it's not like Manchester United or anything, but there's still, you know, so there is this sense of being a Norwich fan, having marking you out as part of a particular tribe, and that's true of all clubs, of course. So that side of things is what we hold on to. And the game itself is so important, but the game is bound up in the nature of clubs. And what I said about the England-Iceland match, for example, being dead, I still support England when there's a, you know, but it wasn't an important match. It wasn't as important as, Norwich versus Brentford.
Yes, yeah.
In an average week.
Yeah.
It just wasn't.
Didn't have that intensity
even
about
though
it.
it was two countries.
Yeah.
And so without a crowd and being one of the early sort of COVID biosecure matches, you thought, actually, yes, we call football the beautiful game, and of course it is, but its beauty is underpinned by what's at stake.
But there's beauty in other ways as well. You talk about the reach and the platform. Just want to touch on the job that Marcus Rashford has done off the pitch. I mean, what an example he is displaying. What do you make of that?
Well, at the time of talking, of course, he's being, without him, I'm sure, meaning to be exactly that, he's being a thorn in the government side because they have a different policy to his very clear one. And I think he's an example of how an intelligent and thoughtful player can, as the word goes, leverage his position to do remarkable good.
Yeah.
And we've seen that with the Black Lives Matter campaign. And I know some people get very pissed off about that and go, no, we should stay out of it. But it's nonsense. It is one of the glories of sport is that it has demonstrated the importance of how humans come together. And, it has long been a way out of poverty for people of all races and backgrounds, but notably, we able to look at race relations in Britain through the lens of football and other sports, and for anyone to pretend that football shouldn't have a role in improving all aspects of our society and using its power and influence, then they misunderstand how society works, I think. And what Marcus Rashford, I don't know him, but I'm deeply impressed by his commitment and his modesty. He's not being all boastful about it. He's just making a very simple point extremely well and putting his effort and his hours where his mouth is, and shaming a lot of us and certainly a lot of politicians.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, every fan is very proud of the work he's doing.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on the inclusivity sort of element of football and sport in itself, really. We've seen initiatives like the Kick It Out campaign, Rainbow Laces as well. Where do you think we're going with the inclusivity in football, and how much further have we got still to go?
Well, someone was reminding me today, it's 800 Premier players, is it? And one of those is going to be gay, for example.
At least, absolutely,
exactly. And the day is yet to come when any LGBT male player, at least, has been able to feel strong enough to come out. And
why do you think they haven't yet?
I think it's because being the first is extremely difficult, it would seem it. I've actually seen, funnily enough, in my capacity as I have a small production company for films and things, and I've seen a couple of screenplays that have been sent over the past 5 years, which are both played around with the same idea, being dramas, one a comedy drama and one a more straight drama, as it were, straight drama, about a gay Premiership footballer deciding to come out. And it's a fascinating thing because these scripts, address exactly that question you've asked. Why does it seem so difficult? But, it's not difficult in acting, we say. Yet when I started acting, there were no out actors. Ian McKellen wasn't out when I started. Yeah. There was no one in Hollywood. Yeah. There were open secrets.
And it wasn't that long ago.
No. And when Rock Hudson died of AIDS, it was like this incredible, earth-shattering. My goodness. But it made a big difference. And then people like Ian McKellen made it easier for others. And so now there are, nobody blinks an eyelid. Yeah. They'd think it weird if somebody did. I mean, they'd feel sorry for somebody who made a fuss about it. They'd go, "Well, you're right. Do you want a glass of water?" but in sport, it's still different. I think it will change. And in 5 years' time, you'll ask me that and you'll go, "Gosh, do you remember that time when there was still no one out and it was still a big issue?" Or maybe 7 years' time, because it's always a little more than you hope it might be. But I think one of the things, and I've been talking about this a lot with cricket, where I have a role in the MCC Foundation, where we address issues of mental health a lot. And one of the things you have to remember is that to be a great sporting athlete, you need to train your body, obviously. You need to train your body generally to be extremely fit and to have all the oxygen and all the things that the sports scientists will tell you need. And you need to train in the specific techniques of your discipline, whether it's running or hurdling or football or cricket or whatever it is. You obviously need to train. But it's quite understood now that you also need to train your mind, that sports psychology is a huge part of sport, particularly and originally, of course, with individual sports, golf, snooker, tennis, so on, where it's so apparent that the individual mind can stop the athlete playing properly, that the mind gets in the way of all that technique because, they're all brilliant at hitting the ball and can do things when relaxed and in, like a snooker player getting a 147 break in practice, just like that, but the mind gets in the way. Well, now we sort of understand that, but we also have to understand that training the mind is not just training the mind to be relaxed and in the zone or whatever a phrase you want to use for sport, but also for it to be happy in life so that you can train better, so that you order your time better, so that things like alcohol and gambling are not tempting you because there's something upsetting you. You've got anxieties, you've got fears, and those fears can be fears of failure, fears of how you look, fears about your relationships, fears of gender, all kinds of fears. We all have them.
Yeah.
I've never met a human being who isn't inside a bit of a marshmallow, a bit scared, frightened that they'll be found out about something. We're all like that. I'm as like that as anybody. I feel more like that than everybody, but that's a kind of vanity that's silly. And so I think what will happen more is that just as computers and biometric testing and the monitoring of how much people are running on the fit pitch and all these new things that have come into sport that have improved and given a tiny edge. So a holistic way of looking at the mind and mindfulness and, addressing issues of masculinity, fears and so on, all of those things and anxieties and phobias, all of these will be as much a part of making a better footballer or a better rugby player or whatever it is as the other exercises they do. So I think that's what it is. Sport each year needs to find a new edge, just like business does. A 0.25% in that direction can just give you, just as a 1/4 second can give Lewis Hamilton that lap, So it is that sport will envelop more the whole person.
Yeah.
And you don't have to get kind of all new agey about it. It is ultimately, it will be for financial gain. It will be because it will increase the number of wins.
Yeah.
If you have players who, the old type of toxic masculine figure whose banter in the dressing room is cruel and mean to young new players and who bullies and the managers who bully and all that atmosphere there and that atmosphere amongst fans of homophobia and racist shouting, it all decreases the confidence and the ability of players to play properly. So in the end, although it has its moral reasons for being the right thing to do, it also has its just plain sporting reasons for being the right thing to do.
There can only be pure benefits from everyone being themselves and feeling included as well. And Proud Canaries have done a lot of work. They've, they've really shown that everyone should feel welcome at football, both at home and away. And what do you make of the work they've done?
I think it's brilliant. I think we've taken the deep tragedy behind the life of Justin Fashanu, and we have, rather than just kind of burying it or being embarrassed by it, we've tried to learn by it. We've all tried to understand the pain and the misery and the upset that can go into being a gay football fan and being bullied at school for being gay, or for being a gay footballer like Justin and just having your life ruined.
Yeah.
And so the Rainbow Laces and the Proud Canaries and the connection that the club has made with LGBT life and self-confidence has been really important. And of course, as a gay man myself, I've been particularly pleased to see it. But it's important in all directions. It's important in all inclusivity, and including families and including women, including people from racial minorities, to feel that they're as much part of Norwich as anything else. I think it's improved hugely in Norfolk, but I call it the swimming pool problem. You would never dive into a swimming pool that had a turd in it, even if someone was to say, but 99% of the water is crystal clear. There's only one little turd in it.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah, but that turd ruins the whole pool.
Yes.
And unfortunately, 100%. In a crowd, one cry, one horrible racist cry or grunt or banana skin or, all these awful things that can happen. Only that is enough to be the turd in the swimming pool that ruins it all.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. It's great that most people, and of course you bung an apple in the air and it will fall down and hit the head of a decent person. I've always believed that. I really do have the highest opinion of my fellow human. That nonsense about, if you collapse in the street, people walk past. You collapse in the street, people will hurry. They'll elbow each other out of the way. So, I trained as a nurse. Come on. Hot, sweet tea. Not sweet. You might be diabetic. Come on. People will cluster around to be helpful. Of course, there are wicked people in the world. There is such a thing as evil. There is nastiness. But really, we have to, I think, we have to assume that people are good, and we you can't legislate for the worst aspects of society, and I think you're rewarded by doing that. Yeah,
there's a lot to champion by human nature and the good elements of it, definitely. I just want to touch on Justin Fashanu. You talked about him a little while ago. So it took 30 years almost before he was inducted into the National Hall of Fame. Yeah. Why did it take so long for him to receive that recognition?
Interesting question. I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything unusual. Sorry, I spoke off mic there a bit, didn't I? I don't think I'm saying anything unusual if I kind of repeat the kind of Will Carling view about how sports are run by, pretty old farts and pretty, that so many administrators in sport have been pretty stuck in the mud when it comes to things, and who knows, somebody may have said, was he that good a footballer or whatever, or just find some reason to, or embarrassment, who knows. But I'm pretty much of the celebrate when the lost lamb is found rather than mourn for how long it was lost, if you sort of mean. I'm really happy that it's happened, and happy that more people now know his name than maybe did 10 years ago. That it's an extraordinary story, the story of the brothers and of their arrival into the world of football, and then the journey of Justin. It is a sad and story, but a very important one for everyone to know about, I think. And I think it's great that Norwich has embraced it. It's a story that definitely needs to be told, doesn't it? Sure. A story also that I want to delve into is your education. You've obviously had long links here in Norwich and Norfolk. Am I right in thinking you went to Norwich City College before going to Cambridge? How did that all unfold? It was very extraordinary. I had a terrible childhood, in terms of behaviour and everything. I was sent away to a prep school in Gloucestershire, which is about 200 miles from Norfolk. So it was, in the old days, I say the old days, in the night, like in the 80s and 90s, when I was asked this question and I had to explain to people what my childhood was like, it was quite difficult to get across the sense of it. But thank goodness for J.K. Rowling, you can just say, well, I used to, at the age of 7, get on the Hogwarts Express from Paddington to my prep school. Yeah. And that's where I was at school in my prep school like that. And I was in that house and they go, I understand how that works now because I read Harry Potter. Whereas before Harry Potter, the British public school system was a closed book to everybody. Yeah, no, but I got expelled from my big school, my actual public school, when I was about 15 and a half, 16. And then I went to a college in King's Lynn because my parents lived in the countryside near Reefham, as you mentioned. Yes. That for the catchment area for that, for some reason, was King's Lynn rather than Norwich, although Norwich was nearer. Okay, and that makes sense. So I went to Norcat, and then I left that. Oh, and I also went to the Paston School in North Walsham. You did, yes. And that was, I played hooky from that so often. I would just go into a cafe in Aylsham and play play pinball all the time. And then there was an embarrassment with credit cards that we needn't go into too much detail about, but it involved me ending up in a prison in the West Country for a while. And then I was finally released on probation.
Okay.
And my parents by this time were kind of, well, darling, we've tried 5 or 6 different schools and it's not really working. I said, no, I'm sorted now. When I was in prison, I thought, this is it. This is my last chance.
Got it out of your system.
I got it out of my system. And always I loved learning. I loved knowledge. I was an academic. I was a natural academic. Despite my refusal to concentrate at school, it was partly because I'm cursed and blessed with an extraordinary memory. So I never had to revise or study anything because I just knew it. I just absorbed information. And so I got very bored by people who didn't know things because I thought, oh, God, and it was awful, But I never really worked for that reason because it all came so easily to me. But in prison, I started to read really positively. And then, so I said to my parents, I want to go to Cambridge. And they said, well, you've mucked up any chance to get in the A-levels. And I said, well, there's Norwich City College. They said, well, you choose to go yourself. So I found out that they had, it was their last day of registration. And so I went to Norwich on the little coach from Reefham and queued up. And there was a little twinkly man there. And he said, yes. And I said, I'd like to do A-levels. And they said, well, what? I said, well, in the humanities. He said, which ones? I said, I'd like to do English, French, history, and history of art.
Wow.
And he said, you do history of art. History is full up. And English is full up. I said, no, I've got to do English because I'm going on to Cambridge to do English.
The determination.
He said, what do you mean you're going on to Cambridge? And he said, I said, well, that's what I want to do. He said, well, you have to do the special Oxbridge exam if you do that. We don't do that here. I said, no, listen, if you let me do English and French and history of art, I will take out papers from the library and make myself do the Cambridge entrance, and I'll get a scholarship, and you'll be proud of me.
Amazing.
And he looked at me for what seemed like an hour, but of course it was 30 seconds. And then he said, I don't know why I'm doing this, but all right. And signed it. Peter Butler, his name was, and I owe him everything to this day. And that's sort of what happened is I got sort of a few jobs to keep myself busy in Bonds of Norwich, for example.
John Lewis now.
Now John Lewis. And I would go most days to Just John's Delicatique, which was this studenty bohemian kind of coffee bar, and chat to people. And I'd go to Norwich Library, and there were the past papers for getting into Cambridge, and I would go through them and try and answer them. And then I offered to pay one of the teachers at the City College to invigilate me for the exam, and he was so touched by this. He said, "I'll do it for free." So I would just be on my own. And fortunately, I did get a scholarship and go to Cambridge. And then everything turned around because my first week, I think I met this wonderful girl who was an amazing actress, and we became best friends. And she encouraged me to do acting. Her name was Emma Thompson.
Oh wow!
Whatever happened to her? And
do you still stay in contact now?
Yes, very much with Dame Emma, as she now is, and. So, and then I met Hugh Laurie and started doing comedy and things like that. And so it just, I was very, very fortunate to have been just young enough still. Of course, Cambridge didn't know that in my first year there, I was still on probation.
Oh, wow. You got away with that.
Yeah. And on the last day of my probation, I told all my friends that I was now no longer, they knew. And and I told one of my tutors, I said, I thought I'd tell you now, Dr. Holland. I said, yesterday I went off probation. He said, well, who put you on probation? Thinking that some teacher, some lecturer at the university had put me on a kind of academic probation. I said, no, a real criminal probation. He said, what? He said, well, why didn't we know that? And I said, well, fortunately, when I applied, you never asked.
There you go. It's not even that you held it back.
I didn't have to lie. Exactly.
No, wow. I love that. And how did your career then unfold? How did you know what you wanted to do? You've achieved so much so far. How did you know which way to go?
Well, I didn't, to be honest. I thought, having sowed, it's an old joke of Churchill's, I think, is young men sow wild oats and old men grow sage. But I think having sowed so many wild oats, I honestly thought I would stay at Cambridge. I was passionate, particularly the thing I was best at was Shakespeare, and I always got incredibly high marks for the Shakespeare. I just loved writing about him. I loved talking about him, thinking about him, and I thought I would stay on at my college and get a doctorate and become an academic and quietly grow tweed in a corner somewhere. What happened was in my second year, I wrote a play. And it went to Edinburgh, and I performed in it as well. And it won this thing called a Scotsman's Fringe First, which is what they used to give out for plays. And Emma was up there, Emma Thompson was up, and she took Hugh Laurie to go and see it. And I hadn't met Hugh because Hugh was going to be the president of the Footlights in the next year. And he had already said to her he wanted someone to write comedy with, and she had said to him, "Well, you've got to see my friend Stephen's play because it's funny and he's in it as well." And so I met Hugh, and he went, "Hello," and I said hello, and then the next term, which was the beginning of our last year, we started writing together, and it just never stopped. We just hit it off. So it was. I always describe it as a non-erotic love story. I mean, it was a comedy love story. We just clicked in the most extraordinary way, and I brought on a friend of mine, Tony Slattery, who was had done plays with things. I brought him into the Footlights as well. So there was Emma and me and Hugh and Tony and a couple of other wonderful people, Paul Shear and Penny Dwyer, the names were, and we went to Edinburgh and our show seemed to do really well. It got tremendous reviews, and the BBC said they wanted to make a programme of it. And some people from Granada Television came round to see it as well. And they came to see us afterwards and asked if we wanted to do a series. And they had got a couple of bright rising talents who were not at Cambridge, because it's just embarrassing that we were all at Cambridge, this whole bloody Oxbridge Mafia thing. And so they'd got someone who graduated from Glasgow Art School and someone from Manchester whose names were Robbie Coltrane and Ben Elton.
Wow.
And they wanted to do a series with us and them. So we did this series. But while we were still at Edinburgh, one night we were doing this performance and we were bowing at the end. And there was big, cheers and everything. But the cheers were particularly extraordinary. I mean, they went mad. And we were thinking, what's going on? And then we noticed there was someone coming on behind us from backstage. Hello, it was Rowan Atkinson. We thought, he was famous by then because Not the 9 O'Clock News had just, was on, and he was the kind of standout figure from it, really. I just want to say voice. One or two words. And he had been asked to give us, we'd won this award. It was the first year it was ever given. It was called the Perrier Award for Best Comedy on the Fringe. Which involved doing a show in London as well. And then the next night, an Australian promoter came and said, I want to take you guys around Australia. Mm-hmm. So within this magical 2 weeks of Edinburgh, we got the BBC doing our show, a Granada series for ITV, and a performance in the West End, and a tour of Australia. I mean, I know how mad it sounds, and I can't imagine how young people starting out in comedy now would listen to that and think, "You jammy." So, it's no question, we were so lucky to be at that period of, and I also think if I hadn't had that period of going to prison and being expelled from schools, I would have gone to Cambridge at an earlier age. I mean,
so timing was everything.
I did all my O-levels, you see, when I was 14, and I would have done all my A-levels when I was 16, and I would have gone to university at 17. Even with a gap year, I would have been 17. So as it was, I was 20 because I had everything else. So I coincided with Emma and Hugh. So I was very fortunate. Yeah.
Where did you find time to keep supporting Norwich then while all of this was going on? And I hope you took your scarf to Australia as well.
It is obviously difficult when you're starting out and you're young, especially in those days when there was no social media, no phones. You either went to the matches or you didn't, and the chance of Norwich having a match on television was pretty rare. I mean, through the 80s, there were those extraordinary ones. Bayern Munich springs to mind.
Oh, yes, Jeremy Goss.
The Jeremy Goss goal, exactly. And I remember watching that in the Groucho Club.
Nice, very nice.
And that was an extraordinary thing. I got so drunk after that.
Good. I think probably most Norwich fan did, yeah. Is that your favourite memory then, being a Norwich supporter?
In some ways it is. And of course it was as you know, every fan thinks it's typical for any piece of good luck to be followed by a piece of terrible luck, and that if your team is losing, you will say, "Oh no, this is Norwich. They'll find a way to lose." But if you're winning, you find a way to lose, and so on. But actually, it just kind of evens itself out, you imagine. But it was horrible luck that the Heysel Stadium disaster meant
Yes.
that we were denied our European glory or whatever. Even if it hadn't been glory, it would have been an experience. Yeah. And I had actually said to my friends, I'm going to, whenever we got an away match in Europe, I'm going to it. I'm really going to do that, because the idea would have been just such a one-off thrill for Norwich to have been in Europe.
Yeah. There's still time. There's still plenty of time for it to happen. Onwards and upwards.
As my grandfather used to say, from your lips to God's ears.
And as for your favourite player, who would be your favourite player so far?
Oh, well, I have to say Darren Eadie, because I've just seen him here in the ground. Over the years, there've been so many. I loved our Supermac was wonderful. And at the moment, Max Aarons and Todd Cantwell, I just love the fact that they're both academy players and they're young and they've got energy and
keeping them was huge, wasn't it?
I was saying this just earlier today to someone. In the summer it looked as if every club wanted a piece of them and they were going to go, and it seemed so unfair, particularly to lose them. You mentioned Patrick Bamford and use others, but because they were academy, they were the real thing. They come from,
Todd Cantwell's just from Dereham, isn't he?
East
down
Dereham,
the road,
exactly. Yeah. So, and obviously Pookie, especially 2 years ago. It was just an extraordinary thing to have this flying fin.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
And of course, like many great strikers, he doesn't look like a striker. I remember my friend Hugh saying that about Messi years ago. He said, when it became apparent that Messi was going to be one of the all-time greats, he said, and the weird thing is, he just looks like someone who's come around to mend your dishwasher. Which is exactly what
the guy next door.
Yeah, he doesn't look like a glamorous footballer at all.
Yeah. And with Max Aarons, he was attracting interest from Bayern Munich, wasn't he? How big a deal was it to have kept him?
He's international class, isn't he? Yeah. No question. It was really big to keep him. I think.
I just want to talk about, you've talked a lot about your health issues and mental health, and we've all got mental health, haven't we? Where do you think social media stands in that? I know you recently took a break from Twitter with your 13 million followers. With sports people, one thing that I always find would be difficult for them is, say a player's had a bad game. He knows in his mind, or she knows that they've had a bad game. They don't need to look on Twitter to get that negativity. And what must that do for the mind as well? You could have lots of positive comments and then the one negative, bam.
Yeah. You have to be Robbie Fowler or something to be able to take it.
Well, experience.
I always used to say this in the early days before social media, that sports people have it so much worse than actors, because I would hear an actor moaning about some review they had, they'd say a disappointing performance or a wooden performance or an unconvincing performance, and they'd be going around the place going, oh, did you see that review I had? And I'd say to them, look, I know how upsetting it is to get bad reviews, and I completely have sympathy with you, but I want to remind you of two things. One is, it was a theatre review. So it was buried in the arts pages, which are read by 0.001% of the population. And two, look at the back page. The headline is, England shame, or Manchester United pathetic.
There you go.
They said you were slightly disappointing. And they've said of these sports people that they were a disgrace. Yeah. And they've absolutely slashed their characters and their ability and mocked and taunted them in ways that if that happened to you, what would you... So just be grateful you aren't a sports person.
Yeah. Why do sports people get that, though, that treatment?
Well, it's one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking earlier, of course, that it's true of clubs and it's true of everything, is that sports is so binary, really. Yes, you can draw, but it's a win or a loss. Americans have this thing, as 1-0 and 12-0 and 12-9, and they can describe every team and every player by their list of successes and failures. 1-0 means 1-1 and lost 1, and that's how everything is described. And so you can say that team is 12-3 for the season. It's 1-12 and lost 3, or it's 6-9. And immediately, that's it. It's just a fact. You win or you lose. And it doesn't matter how graceful that play was and how good that move was and how staunch you were for 99% of the game. The fact is it was 1-0 and it was 1-0 to the enemy. Mm-hmm. And so you lost. And the word lost is such a strong word. It's Trump's word. People are losers. And if you're a loser, it's there, the L on the forehead, and whereas in the arts, it's an opinion.
Yes.
Oh, they didn't like it. It wasn't that successful. It was okay. And of course, some things can be a flop, especially in terms of a play. It can close after a short time because the audience doesn't come. But, still some people say, a lot of people didn't like it. I thought it was great. Yeah. Because you can't go to, you can't go to a team who's just lost 5-0 and said, I thought you played really well.
Well, this is the thing. And you need winners and losers, especially for games like playoff finals. Just thinking back to 2015, Norwich at Wembley. Were you at that game?
I was indeed.
And it's those kind of days that fans, it's what it's all about, isn't it?
Just?
So that was a great memory. And how do you see this season panning out? Obviously started fairly slowly, but then we had 3 wins in a row.
That's right. Yeah, we've gone back to that thing that we do in the Championship, which is score in the 90th minute.
Love a late goal.
It is last chance Norwich as ever. It is a good side. It was a good side last season, and everybody said so. I used to get fed up with hearing Gary Lineker say, it's a shame because Norwich is such a good side. I said, well, yes, I know, but
we had a lot of compliments last season, didn't we, given how it went?
Yeah.
A lot of compliments about style of play. Finally, what does Norwich City mean to you? You travel around the world, you keep coming back to the team, keep coming back and watching Norwich, and it will be great to see you back in the stadium with all the fans. But what does the team mean to you as a whole? Well,
it's just capable of giving one such warm pleasure, such a kind of crazy pride. I mean, it's silly pride because I've got nothing to do with their success, and yet it's one you feel, and it connects me with where I grew up as well. I mean, in the same way that Norfolk will always be home to me,
yes,
because it just is, and crazy, quirky, and weird as Norfolk is, so beautiful. Norwich is to some extent, but it's also beautiful, and and I'm proud too that it is a club that so often does the right thing. I like the fact that it is an outlier and it moves towards inclusivity, and I like the fact that it has always been a place families can feel happy to come to, and I like the atmosphere at Carrow Road, and I think our fans are great, and it enriches my life. I suppose that's really what I have to say about it.
It's really good to hear. And you often hear of players that have played for Norwich and then retired, and they still come back with family, don't they, and settle and send their children to school here. So that's got to say a lot for Norwich as well. I agree. Stephen Fry, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on our podcast. Thank you so much for your time. And look forward to us all being back at Carrow Road whenever it's allowed to happen.
Come on, you yellow.
On the Ball City. Yeah. Thank you.